I spent $5,000 on gaming setup. Husband got mad and shamed me for not being a virgin when we married. So, some quick background, I'm 33, I've been married to my husband, Jake, for 10 years. We met in college, hit it off pretty fast, and honestly, we've had what I thought was a pretty solid marriage up until recently. We both have good careers, he's in finance, and I work in tech. Between the two of us, we pull in a decent amount of money, about $400,000 a year combined, and we've always had separate personal accounts for fun spending in addition to our shared household account. It's worked well for us, or at least, I thought it did. Now, I'm not someone who spends a lot of money on myself. I've always been more of a saver, but recently, I decided to splurge a little. I've been getting into gaming as a way to relax after work, so I saved up $5,000 in my personal account and bought some high-end gaming equipment, a new PC, a fancy monitor, a gaming chair, the works. I was so excited about it, like a kid on Christmas morning. When Jake came home and saw the setup, though, he absolutely flipped. I mean, I knew he might raise his eyebrows at the price tag, but I wasn't expecting that level of anger. He went off about how it was irresponsible and selfish of me to spend that much money without consulting him. I was honestly blindsided. I reminded him that it was from my personal account, not our joint savings, and that we'd both agreed we could use our personal funds however we wanted. But then he hit me with something I did not see coming. He called it financial infidelity. Like, what? He said that as a married couple, any major purchase, personal account or not, should be discussed first. He demanded I return the equipment and insisted we come up with new rules about how much we're allowed to keep in our personal accounts. Here's where things got messy. I pushed back. I told him that I didn't think it was fair, especially considering how much he spends on his hobbies. Jake is really into golf, and I know for a fact he's dropped thousands on clubs, memberships, and weekend trips with his buddies. I've never said a word about it because, hey, it's his money, right? But now it felt like there was this double standard. And let me tell you, Jake did not like being called out. He said it was different because golf is a real sport and that my gaming setup was a frivolous waste of money. At that point, I just kind of shut down. I mean, how do you even argue with someone who's that condescending? That night, I went to bed feeling frustrated and honestly kind of hurt. This wasn't just about the gaming equipment anymore, it felt bigger than that. Like, maybe this was about control or respect or something deeper. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something about the whole situation just didn't sit right with me. Anyway, the next morning, I tried to smooth things over. I apologized for not talking to him about the purchase beforehand and said I'd be happy to discuss spending limits if that would make him feel better. But instead of meeting me halfway, Jake doubled down. He said he wasn't just upset about the money, he was upset about the principle of it. By the end of that conversation, I was starting to feel like I was being treated more like a child than a partner. And honestly, that sucked. Little did I know, though, this was just the tip of the iceberg. Things were about to get a whole lot worse. So, after the whole gaming setup fight, things between Jake and me were tense. I thought it was just a one-off argument, you know? Like, we've had disagreements before, we've been married for 10 years, after all. But this time felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper going on, and I guess I was right. It started small, almost subtle, like he just slipped these little digs into our conversations. He'd casually mention how his colleague's wife just got promoted at her job and how driven she was, then follow it up with something like, "You're so smart, I'm surprised you haven't gone for a bigger role yet." And I'd sit there, blinking, trying to figure out if he was complimenting me or criticizing me. Then it escalated. One night, I was making dinner, just something quick and easy because I'd had a long day at work, and Jake walked into the kitchen, looked at the food, and sighed. Like a really loud, exaggerated sigh. When I asked him what was wrong, he said, "Nothing, it's just, you used to try harder with meals. You know, like you did when we were first married." I was stunned. I mean, I've always done the majority of the cooking, even though we both work full-time. And yeah, maybe I wasn't whipping up gourmet three-course meals anymore, but come on, we're both adults. If he wanted something fancier, he could have made it himself. But it didn't stop there. A few days later, he made a comment about how I'd been letting myself go. I'd just gotten home from a run, sweaty and gross, so I thought he was joking. But nope. He went on to say he missed how I used to dress up for him and keep my hair styled all the time. He even suggested I start wearing makeup more often. At this point, I was starting to feel like I couldn't do anything right. And here's the thing, I'm not the kind of person to just roll over and take criticism without trying to fix things. So, like an idiot, I actually did try. The next weekend, I went shopping for new clothes, started wearing makeup more often, and even Googled easy but impressive dinner recipes to step up my cooking game. I thought maybe if I showed him I was willing to make an effort, things would go back to normal. No matter what I did, Jake always found something to nitpick. If I dressed up, he'd say it was too much for just lounging at home. If I cooked something fancy, he'd comment on how it wasn't as good as his mom's. I felt like I was jumping through hoops just to prove my worth, and it was exhausting. Then came the moment that really broke me. One night, we were sitting on the couch, and Jake brought up a conversation we'd had years ago, back before we got married. He said, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about how you told me you weren't a virgin when we met." Now, this was something we'd already talked about ages ago. I'd been honest with him from the start about my past, and he'd assured me it didn't bother him. But now, 10 years into our marriage, he suddenly decided it did bother him. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I feel like I settled for a low-value woman." I can't even describe what that felt like. It was like the air got sucked out of the room. I just sat there, staring at him, trying to process what he just said. I asked him if he really meant that, and he doubled down, saying he wished he'd waited for someone pure. That was the moment I realized something was seriously, seriously wrong. I started paying closer attention to Jake after that. His phone, his schedule, the way he acted when he thought I wasn't looking. And that's when I noticed it, the late-night texts, the random work dinners, the sudden need to spend more hours at the office. One night, when he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I don't usually go through his stuff, but my gut was screaming at me, so I picked it up. And there it was. A text from someone named Emily, with a heart emoji next to her name. "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I scrolled up and found weeks of texts between them. Flirty messages, inside jokes, even a few photos that definitely weren't appropriate for a married man to receive. When Jake came out of the shower, I was sitting on the bed, holding his phone. He froze when he saw me, and I just lost it. I demanded to know who Emily was and how long this had been going on. At first, he tried to deny it, saying she was just a friend, but when I started reading the texts out loud, his face went pale. That's when he admitted it. He'd been seeing her for a few months. She worked in his office, and apparently, she was fun and made him feel alive again. I don't even remember what I said after that. The rest of the night is a blur of shouting, crying, and him trying to justify his actions. He kept saying it was just a fling and that it didn't mean anything, but by then, I was done. I told him to pack a bag and leave. After I told Jake to pack a bag and leave, things moved fast. Like, one second I was sitting there crying into a throw pillow, and the next I was Googling divorce lawyers at 2 a.m. with mascara streaked down my face. I knew there was no coming back from this. I mean, cheating? Emotional abuse? Calling me a low-value woman? Yeah, hard pass. Jake stayed with a friend for a few days while I tried to figure out my next steps. It was honestly the most peaceful I'd felt in months. No passive-aggressive comments, no walking on eggshells, it was like I could finally breathe again. But I wasn't naive enough to think this would be the end of it. I got in touch with a lawyer the next morning. She was amazing, sharp, no nonsense, and exactly the kind of person you'd want in your corner during a divorce. I explained everything to her, the cheating, the texts, the way he'd been treating me. She listened patiently, then walked me through my options. Here's the thing, the house we live in was something I inherited from my grandparents a few years ago. It's fully paid off, and it's been in my family for generations. Legally, it's mine, but Jake had contributed a significant amount of money toward renovations a few years ago, about $150,000, which came out of our joint savings at the time. My lawyer said that could complicate things if Jake decided to fight for a share of the house. Of course, Jake did decide to fight. When he found out I'd contacted a lawyer, he came storming back into the house and started yelling about how he wasn't going to get screwed over in the divorce. He acted like he was the victim here, which was honestly laughable. But then he dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. Apparently, Emily, the 24-year-old coworker he'd been cheating with, is pregnant. Yeah. Let that sink in for a second. He said it all smug, like he expected me to be jealous or something. But honestly, I just felt relieved. Relieved that I was getting out of this marriage before I wasted another decade of my life on someone who was so clearly not who I thought he was. Anyway, Jake doubled down on his demands after that. He wanted half the house, even though it was legally mine, and he wanted a huge chunk of our shared savings. My lawyer and I were prepared to fight him on the house, but here's the thing, I was so done with him and his drama that I didn't even care about the money at that point. I just wanted him out of my life as quickly as possible. So, we negotiated. In the end, we came to an agreement, I'd keep the house, but I had to give Jake 75% of our other liquid assets, including savings and investments. It stung, not gonna lie. We had a decent chunk of money saved up, and watching most of it go to someone who cheated on me felt like a slap in the face. But my lawyer reminded me that dragging things out in court could cost even more in the long run. Plus, Jake's argument about contributing to the renovations gave him some leverage there. So, I signed the papers, and just like that, it was over. The day Jake came to collect his things was surreal. He acted all chipper, like we were just two old friends parting ways. He even had the audacity to thank me for being reasonable during the divorce. I didn't say much, just handed him a box of his stuff and waited for him to leave. As he walked out the door, he turned around and said, "You'll regret this, you know. You're giving up on something great." I didn't even bother responding. I just closed the door and locked it behind him. A couple of weeks after everything was finalized, I was just starting to feel like myself again. I'd been focusing on work, reconnecting with friends, and even started redecorating the house to make it feel more mine. I'd cleared out every trace of Jake, his golf trophies, his stupid motivational posters, even the cologne he left behind in the bathroom. Things were looking up. Then she showed up. It was a Saturday morning, and I was still in my pajamas, sipping coffee and scrolling through TikTok like a normal person. The doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, there she was, Emily. At first, I didn't even recognize her. She looked so young. Like, I knew she was 24, but seeing her in person made it painfully obvious. She was standing there with her hands on her pregnant belly, looking nervous as hell. "Hi," she said. "Can I talk to you?" I was so caught off guard that I just kind of stood there for a second. But then curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped aside to let her in. I mean, what was I going to do, leave a pregnant woman standing on my porch? We sat down in the living room, and she immediately started spilling everything. Apparently, Jake had spun her this whole elaborate story about me. According to him, I was some kind of raging drug addict who'd blown through all our money, forcing him to work extra hours just to keep us afloat. He told her I'd dropped out of high school and only got my tech job because of dumb luck, and that I was too lazy to cook or clean or take care of him. Oh, and for good measure, he also claimed that I'd cheated on him multiple times over the years. I could feel my jaw clenching as she talked, but I let her finish before I said anything. When she was done, I just stared at her for a minute, trying to figure out how someone could believe such obvious lies. "None of that is true," I finally said. She looked skeptical, so I pulled out my phone and started showing her proof. Photos of my high school graduation, my college degree, screenshots of my bank account showing years of consistent savings, even emails from work about my recent promotion. I didn't hold back. I wanted her to see the truth. By the time I was done, her face was pale. She kept shaking her head and saying, "I don't understand. Why would he lie about all of this?" I didn't have an answer for her. Jake lying wasn't exactly new to me at this point, but hearing how far he'd gone to manipulate her was still shocking. Then she dropped her own bombshell. Apparently, Jake had told her that I'd been the one to file for divorce because I was bitter about him wanting to start a family. He'd painted himself as the victim, saying he was forced to leave me because I refused to grow up and support his dreams of fatherhood. I almost laughed out loud at how ridiculous it all was. I mean, who even is this guy? The Jake I married wasn't perfect, but he wasn't this pathological. I told her everything about the cheating, the emotional abuse, the way he treated me during our marriage. I didn't sugarcoat anything. If she was going to be tied to him because of the baby, she deserved to know exactly what kind of man she was dealing with. But here's the kicker: after I laid it all out, she just sat there, silent, for what felt like forever. Then she looked up at me and said, "I think you're just trying to make him look bad because you're jealous." I couldn't believe it. After everything I'd just shown her, after all the lies I'd exposed, she still chose to believe him. At that point, I was done. I stood up and said, "Look, I've done my part. I've told you the truth. What you do with it is up to you. But don't come crying to me when he screws you over, too." After Emily left, I sat on my couch for a long time, just staring at the wall. I wasn't even mad anymore. I was just tired. Like, bone deep, soul-crushing tired. I'd spent so much energy trying to piece together the wreckage Jake left behind, and hearing Emily's story only confirmed what I already knew: I'd made the right decision. The weeks that followed were a blur of small victories. I got a promotion at work, something Jake had always downplayed when I talked about my career goals. My boss said I'd been doing amazing work, and they wanted me to take on more leadership responsibilities. It felt like validation, like a reminder that I was capable and smart and worthy, despite everything Jake had tried to make me believe. I also reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. One of my best friends from college invited me on a girls' weekend to the mountains, and it was exactly what I needed. We drank wine, went hiking, and stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in forever, I felt like me again, not Jake's wife, not the woman who got cheated on, just me. As for the house, turning it into my own space became my therapy. I painted the walls, swapped out furniture, and hung up art that actually made me happy. The gaming setup that started this whole mess? Still there, front and center in the living room. Every time I sit in that chair, I feel a little spark of defiance, like a quiet middle finger to Jake and his ridiculous financial infidelity nonsense. And then there was Jake. He and Emily ended up staying together, at least for now. I heard through the grapevine that they moved into a little apartment not far from his office. She had the baby a few months later, a boy. I won't lie, seeing the pictures stung a little. Not because I wanted Jake back, but because it was a reminder of everything I thought my life would be. Marriage, kids, a happy family, I'd wanted all of that once, and now it felt like I was starting over from scratch. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. I survived a toxic marriage, a messy divorce, and a whole lot of self-doubt, and I came out the other side better for it. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.